Um, Today's Wednesday night. It's halacha and Tanya. Last time we were learning the laws of Challah, the mitzvah of Challah. We're discussing the amount of dough needs to be taken, whether it's without a bracha up to from 1,000 grams. I mean, if less than 2 pounds 11 ounces of flour, you don't separate. From 2 pounds 11 ounces to 3 pounds 11 ounces, you separate without a bracha. Over 3 pounds 11 ounces, then you separate with a bracha. Okay, that's what we discussed last week. So we said this week we're going to talk about and move on to other laws, the laws of a challah bake. Now, it became very popular that people want to make challah bakes, okay? They get more women involved in Yiddishkeit, and they should do more mitzvahs and so on. The problem is you have to be very careful with the challah bakes, because if it's not done according to halacha correctly, so then people are going to be making brachas in vain. Now, we're mentioning that the minimal amount of challah you need to make a bracha even is 3 pounds 11 ounces. Now that usually doesn't work by a big challah bake. Somebody makes a big amount of dough, and then they give out to each person separate pieces, and everybody, needs the dough, and they bake the challah, and everybody. The problem with that is, sometimes those people will not be able to separate challah at all with the bracha. So let me explain the dinners like this. If somebody makes a big dough, a large amount of dough, that let's say 5 pounds. But when they're making the 5 pounds, there's like 50 people there. So they're giving out each person a little piece of dough that they need, and they bake it into challah. Even though the original dough was like 5 pounds, but the fact that when you made the dough, the intent was that you're giving out little pieces to everybody to do their own thing, that big amount of dough is not obligated in challah. And if you separate challah from that with a bracha, you're making a bracha in vain, because it's a very, very big problem. So therefore, what could be done technically? So the din is like this. If there's one woman that, let's say, has 5 pounds of dough, okay? And then she gives out, before she separates challah, she gives every person a small little piece of challah, and the one that made the big dough is planning to retain a large amount, 3 pounds 11 ounces for herself. That means she's not giving out the whole 5 pounds to everybody. She's making, let's say, 7 pounds of dough, and she's planning to keep for herself 4 pounds that demands separation of challah with the bracha. Then the din is everybody who gets a little piece can separate challah with the bracha from that piece. So if the person making the dough is planning to retain a large amount, 4 pounds, let's say, of challah of dough for herself, then when she gives out, before she separates challah, she gives each a little piece to everybody. Everybody can make their own bracha and separate challah. That's not a good idea to do. Why isn't it a good idea to do them? Because people are going to think that, on a little piece of dough that I made, I could separate challah with the bracha. So educational-wise, it's not a very smart thing to do. Unless if you explain and make a whole class out of it, it's retaining 4 pounds for herself that would demand the bracha, and she did not separate challah yet. So then she would be allowed to give each person a little piece, and they would have to separate challah with the bracha. But not everybody's going to learn that. Not everybody's going to remember that. So therefore, what's more The more practical way, and this is the way Rabbanim write, is the way it really should be done to do it properly. The lady should take, let's say, a large amount of dough. She should have in mind to keep proper amount of dough for herself. She should make the bracha and separate challah. And then she should give everybody a little piece of dough that they should need and make it into a challah. But then they're not going to be doing the mitzvah of challah. And then nobody's going to have a misunderstanding that somebody made a mistake. So the most practical way of doing it is one woman per group makes a large amount of dough, enough to retain for herself over 3 pounds, 11 ounces of dough. Then she makes a bracha and she tells the women, answer amen to my bracha. I'm making a bracha because it's a large amount of dough. You're going to get a little piece of dough. You're going to knead it and bake it, and you don't have to separate challah because I did the mitzvah for you. That is the least complicated way of doing it, and nobody can misunderstand it. But technically, if there's a large amount of dough and the person is planning to retain the dough for herself, enough, 4 pounds, let's say, or anything over 3 pounds, 11 ounces, and then before she separates challah, she gives everybody a little piece of that dough, then everybody can make their own bracha. But again, the problem with that, like we said, is people are going to think that even on a small piece of challah, you can make a bracha. So the challah things should be very, clear that one person is making the bracha out loud and everybody's answering amen. And you tell them that if you go home and you bake 3 pounds, 11 ounces of flour, and then you have a right amount, then you can make the bracha. But generally speaking, again, it's a very important thing to remember. If you have a large amount of dough, okay, 5 pounds of dough, really it's 3 pounds, 11 ounces. Let's say you have 5 pounds of dough, but you're not planning to keep any amount that's big enough to separate challah from, nobody is allowed to separate challah. And if they do, it's a bracha in vain. Okay, so practically speaking, that's what should be done. Now, another interesting din, before we move on to other dinim, and that is dough which was made by a non-Jew does not need to be separated challah from. The Torah says, Reishis arisei seichem. I'll give you an example. Let's say you buy bread from a non-kosher company, let's say Old Country Bread or all these types of, the big companies that have a good hechsher is Pas Yisrael. It is Pas Yisrael. You don't have to separate challah from it because it wasn't made by a Jew. The dough was made by a goy. If it's a Jewish company, so the owner is Jewish and a Jew made the dough, so then you have an obligation of separating challah, and you're not allowed to eat it until you separate. But as we mentioned last week, which is a very important din, I'm going to say it again because it's very common. If somebody baked challah and they forgot to separate challah, and now it's Friday night at the table and they realize they did not separate challah, so if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you cannot eat that challah until after Shabbos. If you are outside of Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz, you're allowed to eat the whole challah, leave over a piece, the size that you would separate challah from, and then you burn that after Shabbos. Okay, but you can't do that in Eretz Yisrael. So again, ideally, this happens also very often. I get a call. People make dough, they bake half of it, and they forgot to separate challah. So what you need to do then, you take the baked stuff, you cover it, you separate challah from the piece of dough with the bracha, and then it's all covered. If they're all baked already, you still have to put all the challahs together in a pan, cover it with a towel, separate a piece of challah. You're going to be ruining one challah, but there's nothing you can do about it. That's basically the dinim of Challah. If anybody has any questions, I'll take them. If not, we'll move to the next dinim. Okay, next din we're going to learn is the din of what's called tabling dishes, tfilas kelim. Tabling dishes means like this. We're going to get into details. I mean, not now. Again, I mentioned it Monday night. There's no class now for 3 weeks. I'm going to be out of town for 3 weeks. The next class, Monday night, will be February 24th. And the next Wednesday night class will be February 26th. Until February 24th, there's no classes. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So then, in Mitzvah Shem, when I get back, we're going to go into details, what appliances need tabling, what things do need, what things don't need, what materials need, what materials don't need. What do you do if you have an electrical appliance? But before we get into that, let's discuss the din of tfilas kelim. So it says if you buy a new vessel from a non-Jew, okay, if it's metal or glass, you're not allowed to use it until they're tabled in a kosher mikveh. A kosher mikveh means a mikveh which is kosher for women. Not a mikveh that's kosher for men, like a swimming pool, which is kosher for a man. It has to be a proper mikveh of rainwater or a natural well or a natural lake or ocean, which would be, all those are kosher mikvehs. You're not allowed to use it even once. I don't know where there's a misunderstanding. Some people say, well, I could use it once before I table it. It's not true. You're not allowed, something that needs to be immersed in the mikveh needs to be immersed before you use it even once. We're going to learn in Mitzvah Shem next time which materials need tefillah, which materials need to be tabled in the mikveh, which materials don't need to be tabled. Which one, some people make a bracha on, some people don't make a bracha on. Some materials, halachically, you don't have to table it in the mikveh, but our custom is to table it. So we'll get into all those things later. Now, what's the purpose? It's kosher. I mean, it's brand new. What is the purpose that you have to table a dish or a thing in the mikveh? So the commentaries explain to remove it from the impurity of the non-Jew to the purity of a Jew. That's the reason. There is an argument in halacha if tfilas kelim is a biblical mitzvah or is it a rabbinic mitzvah? You have to do it biblically, or it's only a rabbinic mitzvah. What is the difference between these two opinions? It's a very practical difference between if it's biblical or it's rabbinic. So the difference is like this. Are you allowed to table dishes on Shabbos? Let's say you live in a place where there's a mikveh. You're allowed to carry, it's in your house, whatever. There's a mikveh you can carry. So the then question is, am I allowed to table dishes on Shabbos? What's the question? If I'm not allowed to use it, and I put it into the mikveh, I'm making that usable. So halachically, it's called, I'm fixing something that was not usable. That's mitzakemon. It's one of the lamites malachas. So if I hold it's biblical, that means I'm not allowed to use it. Biblically, it's not a vessel until I table it. Now I'm going to immerse it in the mikveh. I'm making it usable, so I wouldn't be allowed to table. If it's only rabbinic, it's only a rabbinic mitzvah to table dishes, then technically, biblically, it's a vessel already. The rabbis came along and said, no, you have to immerse it in the mikveh. So then I would be allowed to immerse it in the mikveh because I'm not making it into a vessel. It's not a table, but it's still usable biblically as a vessel. So I'm not making anything into a vessel. What is the halacha? The Alter Rebbe paskins, the Alter Rebbe rules that tefillas kelim is min haTorah, is biblical. If it's biblical, then I'm not allowed to table any dishes on Shabbos. Okay, not allowed to table any dishes on Shabbos. There would also be another difference between if it's biblical or rabbinic. There's a rule in Torah, a biblical doubt, you have to be strict. Rabbinic doubt, you're lenient. That's what not because it's any better or worse. The Chachamim said a biblical doubt is a biblical doubt, so you have to be strict. A rabbinic doubt, we're saying that the Chachamim themselves say if it's a doubt, you could be more lenient. So what happens if I table? I don't remember if I tabled the dish or not. I don't remember. Did I immerse it in the mikveh or not? So if it's a biblical obligation, then it's a biblical doubt. If it's a biblical doubt, I cannot use it. I have to table it again without a bracha. If it's a rabbinic doubt, then technically I could use it because it's a rabbinic doubt. So these are differences in the mitzvah, if it's biblical, if it's rabbinic, and things like that. Now, so technically, a ger, a person who converts, even if they kept kosher before, they would have to, when they become Jewish, they would have to table all the dishes again because they were not Jewish and now they became Jewish. So it needs to be tabled. There's a very interesting question. I don't want to get into the practical dinim too much because I don't want to take just a big break, but it's an interesting concept. When we sell a chametz to the goy on Pesach, so for 8 days, 9 days, those utensils are owned by the goy. So now there's a big halachic question. When I buy back my dishes from the goy after Pesach, I buy back the chametz the night after Pesach. Why don't I have to table all my dishes? They were owned by a goy. I just bought them back from the goy. So why don't I have to table the dishes? It's a very interesting halachic question, which is asked in halacha. Because of that, because of this question, many authorities in halacha maintain that when I sell my chametz to the goy and I sell the dishes, I'm not selling the dishes. According to many opinions, you don't sell the dishes. I'm selling the chametz in the dish, but I'm not selling the dish is mine. I'm selling the chametz that's inside the dish. Therefore, when I buy it back after Yom Tif, it was always my vessel. I never sold the vessel to the goy. But the Rebbe has a long sikha about it. It's not for now, but the Rebbe says that according to the Alter Rebbe's sale of chametz, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say we're selling the chametz in the vessel. He says we're selling the vessel. The Alter Rebbe holds we actually sell the vessel to the goy. So then the question is, so why don't we have to table dishes after Pesach? Or the Chabad should have to table dishes after Pesach. And the Rebbe has a whole sikha, and the Rebbe explained because it was never a possibility for the guy to use the dish because it was in your house. He's not coming to your house. If the guy came to your house to use the dish that he bought, you would have to table it again after Pesach probably. And because of this, the guy can't come to use it, so therefore you really don't need to. That's what the Rebbe learned. One of the reasons you don't really have to table the dishes again in that case because he never had the opportunity to use it. Another interesting question that comes up, and this very, very common question. What do you do with electrical appliances that say do not immerse in water? You have an urn, okay? An urn is a metal urn that you put water in. It's a clay soda. It's a vessel you use for a meal. Halachically, an urn needs to be immersed in the mikveh. So what do? Because it says do not immerse. Technically, if you immerse it in the water, you might ruin it. So what do? So there's three suggestions that contemporary halacha writes. One is you immerse it as is in the mikveh. Even though it says do not immerse, you immerse it. And then you make sure it's dried out. You dry it out and extend it for a week or with a hair dryer, and hopefully it would work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, by the way. Another opinion says, what do you do with electrical appliances? So, by the way, let me give you an example. A coffee maker, okay? So the coffee also goes into the actual machine. So that you can't immerse in the water. But the glass container, that for sure you have to table, that comes out. Any parts that come out of an electrical appliance that you could immerse in the mikveh, you have to immerse in the mikveh. Because those parts, there's no reason why you don't table them. Another opinion says, Rabbi Yosef Shusterman says, that you table everything but the electrical part. You table the whole urn at one time. Because not like kashering utensils, you can do part at a time. But when it comes to immersing something in the mikveh, you cannot do it part at a time. You can't do even if you drop out, you have to retable it. Or if there's a little sticker on it that you didn't take off before you immersed it in the mikveh, you have to immerse it again. Every part of the mikveh, the urn or the utensil has to be, the appliance, the glass, whatever it is, has to be immersed underwater at the same time. And we'll learn more dinim. I'm just saying that. So number one opinion says you table and let it dry out for a long period of time. Another opinion says you table everything but the electrical part. And then there's a third very practical opinion of the Minchas Yitzchak, which is based on a din in Shulchan Aruch and Erev Shabbos. And he says like this, what you do is, because the din is like this, a utensil of a goy that a Jew borrows, you don't need to toivel. You don't need to immerse it in the mikveh. Why? Because it belongs to the goy. It's kosher, it's brand new. But a vessel that belongs to a goy, to a non-Jew, and a Jew is borrowing it, you don't need to table it in the mikveh. Okay? So he has another eight, so you do like this. You call in a guy that you know. You tell him, listen, he's going to know you're crazy, but we're crazy anyway. You're going to tell him, listen, for Jewish purposes, I have to give you this urn, using the case of an urn, as a gift, and I'm going to borrow it back from you indefinitely. So you have to actually give, you can't just say do it over the phone. Yeah, okay. You have to give him the urn. The guy has to pick it up and acquire it. It's his. And now you're borrowing it back indefinitely. So what's the halacha there? Because it's a very complicated thing to table. In a time of emergency, halacha says temporarily that you can give it to a guy as a present, have the guy acquire it. If he doesn't acquire it, it's not his, and you borrow it back indefinitely, and then you don't have to take it. So that's the third way what people could do with electrical appliance. There's a fourth thing that people don't say. I mean, they do write it, but it's brought down in halacha. If you know how to take it apart, which everybody knows how to take things apart. If let's say you could take apart the urn in a way that is not usable, and then you put it back together in a vessel that a Jew made, then you don't have to table it. And there's three halachic things and one practical. One practical, again, taking things apart, everybody could do. To put it back together again, Humpty Dumpty, that whole thing. If somebody's handy and they know how to unscrew it and make it not usable, and then screw it back together and make it work, so then it's like a Jew made it. It's a brand new vessel that a Jew made. Then you wouldn't have to table it either. Okay, that's it for halacha. Now we're going to go to Tanya.